Hey, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. We're talking about getting into college for the class of 2023, juniors, rising seniors. So very excited to have time to talk with y'all tonight and hopefully answer a lot of your questions. We're going to have ample time for Q&A. I'm going to kind of go through a deck, but also I want to make sure I save question and answer time at the end. We have, I believe, yes, so before we jump in and talk about helping your kids get into school, let's take a minute and do a really quick poll. It'll be all of 25 seconds. So we know who's here tonight. Are you a student, a parent, or an educator? And then if you are a student or have a student, where are you? And obviously, almost all of you are going to be juniors. And then we have, do you need any help with anything in this last, test prep, tutoring, coaching? I'm sorry. And then finally, should one of us reach out to you? That's it. Then you close it out. Easy peasy, done and done. So one thing, I'm going to cover a lot of material again pretty quickly. So there's time for Q&A, which I think is really important. It's kind of a format, but we will send you the deck. And if you want to review it later on, it'll be there. We'll also send you a link to the recording. And so that'll be helpful if you want to watch that part again. So let me just jump in and do some of the global broad strokes, and then we can do some more, formal, tighter questions with the Q&A session. Without further ado. All right, so academics, college admissions, what's going on? Things have been shifting. There's definitely a new equilibrium in the world of college admissions. A lot of changes post-pandemic. We'll talk about some of those tonight. But ultimately, one of the big changes that has come about since the pandemic is it's gotten a little bit more challenging for colleges to predict who is going to accept an offer of admission if given an offer of admission. It's something called yield. And yield, those rates have been really dropping. A lot more kids are applying to more and more schools. The Common App numbers are out, and the kids used to be kids applied to 3 schools, 4 schools. Now it's like 7, 8. Some kids are applying to 10 schools because if they're shooting for schools that are selective, the rates of acceptance at many schools have gotten so low, kids are feeling compelled to apply to more schools. So that's changed that dynamic somewhat. And the colleges understand you're applying to our school and maybe 12 other schools. That changes how they read, that changes how they give offers, that changes their use of the wait lists, things like that. So that's an important piece. And it adds more focus to this concept called demonstrated interest, where they're trying to figure out, if we actually do give you an offer, will you come? And historically, one of the primary levers they looked at was testing, because they had a sense of where they fell in the pecking order. If I have a 32 on the ACT, our average is, you're right in our sweet spot. Typically, a student like you, we can yield, we can get you to come to our, However, if you have a 35 on the ACT, our average is a 31. Typically, we're going to lose you to a more selective school. And so testing really helped them calibrate, if we give you an offer, will you actually come? But in the world of test optional admissions, they're losing a lot of that data in terms of testing. And also, during the pandemic, there were problems with visits. Kids couldn't, but now thankfully people can visit again. But they have these huge lists of like data points, where you live, what's your zip code, what school, private school, public school. And they can calculate how likely are you to come to our school if we give you an offer. And so they're still using a lot of heavy data with enrollment management software and technology to help them figure it out. But definitely it's harder than it was before the pandemic for a number of reasons. So that's all to say, they're trying to figure out who will come. Because there's more uncertainty, more ambiguity, more kids are applying to more schools. One thing that colleges are looking to do more of is fill more of their class with guaranteed applicants. And one of the best ways to do that is early decision. Restrictive early action for schools like Yale or Princeton or Harvard, but then ED for dozens and dozens of schools, from Boston University to Northeastern to Penn to Tulane to Brown. There's so many great schools who use ED as a way to lock in their class. There's no uncertainty. If we give out 12 offers, how many kids will come? This is early decision. You're saying, I want to go to your school. Here's your offer. Bam, bam, handshake, we're finished. You can get out of it if the money's not right, but typically they yield a dramatic number of kids. Even like Yale, the head of admissions for undergraduate said for a single choice early action at Yale, they're yielding 90% of their kids. So they know if those kids are picking Yale for their number one choice early, they're going to go to Yale. And so it really helps them figure, and that helps them because they're trying to figure out who's coming, make sure the numbers right, but also their money, making sure like, so you're a full pay kid, we need so many full pay kids to balance so many high need kids. And they're trying to manage their discount rate. Because college, if you haven't noticed, has gotten obscenely expensive. And so is private school for that matter, and a lot of things, and so are nannies for that matter. Kids are expensive these days. But my nephew just got into Bates up in Maine, and it's net, it's like $84,000. He's getting a scholarship. He's a great football player. He was looking at other NESCAC schools, he's in Div 2 and Div 3 schools. But 84 on the front, if you have 2 or 3 kids, that's per year times 4. It's a lot of money. And so there, money matters, the discount rate matters. And we'll talk some about that too, in terms of thinking about how do you manage merit-based aid? How do you manage, need-based aid, things like that. But definitely one of the keys is when they do early decision, they're able to lock in. They know we're getting, 2,000 full pay kids, bam. We have this much of our budget filled for the year. Then it helps them figure out how much aid can they allocate out to other students and, for the regular pool and so forth. But for a lot of students who are full pay, they're locking in a lot of their money with the ED kids. One of my good friends, Tom McManus, was a colleague of mine at Penn, and he was on the admissions department for years. And he said, yeah, early decision is paved with gold for the schools. That's when they yield a lot of their really affluent kids, but also they also bring in now more, high need kids. But it's tougher for the middle class, who they really need a really great offer, a really great financial aid package. So you have fewer middle class kids applying ED than affluent and very high need, which is kind of an interesting dynamic with the admissions process. But anyhow, early is just huge. Let me show you a slide. So Barnard, they're filling about 2/3 of their class early. This is crazy. Tulane, I heard a Tulane rep speak a few years ago that they're filling like a majority of their students. They have a ED1 that's going to be due in November 1st. There's an ED2. If you get dinged from your first ED, you say, Tulane, I want you ED2. That's due by January 1st. There's also early action, which is due on November 1st. Then there's regular due January 1st. But they're filling the vast majority of their class early action, ED1, ED2. And there's almost no spots left for regular. That's how Tulane does it. Not every school does it like that, but there are definitely schools who are going so heavy into early. Dartmouth, I remember when Penn and Duke went over 50%, but they were creeping like 30%, 40, 50, and then suddenly they're over it. They're half the class. Early action is not as compelling or as powerful of a lever as it used to be, because so many kids got the memo and so many kids are applying to a bunch of schools early. But it's different when it's restricted early action. Only a few schools do that, like Yale. Again, they yield 9 out of 10 kids applying early action to Yale because they have to choose one school to apply early to. But most schools are unrestricted and kids can be applying to 10 schools early. So it doesn't have the same power as it used to, but early decision still carries a lot of power. And for many schools where the rates of acceptance, in many cases, like for the top schools in the country, the Ivies, the rates of acceptance are 3 times, or 3x. You're getting an early decision versus regular. And there are some considerations. You have more, more the alumni kids are in that pool, or more the athletes in the pool. But even so, even pulling out some of the hooked applicants, there's still a very meaningful advantage for those kids. And so here's one example of BU, just the use of early and using it as a strategy to manage yield and hit their targets. So you see 10 years ago, they only had 370, ED admits. That was 1/10 of their class. And look at last year, the 2,130 kids. It's incredible. And the same, I can show you a bunch of other schools where they're yielding so much of their class using ED. So that's been a big change. And that's been a big change, especially as rates of admission keep dropping lower. And that was a big change of the pandemic. Suddenly the bottle's off the top. Kids no testing. Well, so many kids then suddenly applied. Now there's a whole flood of applicants, but the early pool is still a meaningful strategy. We know that waitlists, because there's more uncertainty when kids are applying to 12 schools and 13 schools, and they're getting 5 offers, they're going to be turning down 4 schools. Schools realize that now, and so they're having bigger and bigger wait lists. Historically big wait lists. Sometimes if the incoming freshman class is 2,000 kids, they could have a wait list of 3,000 kids. And it sounds like that's garbage. Why do they need that big of a wait list? But they're hedging their bets. They don't know how much, how many kids are not going to deposit on May 1st. They also don't know, will there be some melt over the summer? Some kids always pull out and go somewhere else. Because again, there's always movement later in the year with wait lists. Like school, some kids get an offer in June to a school that was a priority. They pull their acceptance. They were going to go to this school. Now they're going to pull. Then they're suddenly down the chain. So there's more. It's called summer melt when kids take a different offer or withdraw from your acceptance. But definitely there are big lists. And if you ask them, where do I fall on the wait list? It isn't really like that. It isn't like a ranked 1 to 2,000, because part of it could be what they're looking for. There's a wait list if from the Wyoming or from Georgia or from Hawaii, and if they need Hawaii and one of their kids pulls out, okay, you're going to have a much higher choice. It's not a kid from Jersey, because they have tons of kids from Jersey, but still there's something special. They're trying to fill, make sure there's enough male dancers in a program or something for an instrumentalist, an oboist. And if that one pulls out, we need one. So it's not just, 1 to 3,000, but it could be within that there are tranches, and you're actually decently high up for the Wyoming oboist tranche. And if that comes up, you're going to jump in front of kids with better grades and better scores because you fill an institutional need. And, colleges, they look out for themselves first and make no apologies. Like, they are looking for their own interests all the time. And so if you need, if they need more diversity geographically, ethnically, in terms of there's a skill you have, there's something they need, you're higher up, for them because they're meeting their own needs, which makes sense. So the admissions offices, we're seeing the change, and it's kind of a settling down of the new world. The new world is test optional for the most part. We'll talk about that, at some length. But more kids are applying without test scores, and still, like I learned at Cornell, 70% of kids applying to Cornell had test scores, 30% didn't. And in general, schools who are more selective get more kids with test scores. That's natural because the pool is tougher and you want to check every box you can because it's just very tough at some of these top schools. But, apps have increased. There's more of a burden. They're having to read more and more applications for the same number of seats. And that's, changing the read. Now, when it comes to academics, a lot of kids have A's these days. That's something that we've noticed. There's not been an increase in average test scores, but there's been an increase in grades. There's a recently report in the past 2 weeks that's come out looking at the NAEP and the National Educational Progress Assessment, looking at average grades. Average GPAs keeps rising from the 80s to 90s to now. A lot more kids have A's and decent, pretty high A's. And so part of it is that's not as exceptional as it used to be. And so they look at grade trends, but they look very closely at academic rigor. Rigor is a big deal now because there's been a lot of grade inflation. So they're looking more as a proxy for academic readiness at the rigor in the context of your GPA balanced with the rigor. And so here, I can give more slides to this. But a lot of kids, the average, I saw something where it was like a 3.2, 3.3. It was like a 3.38 was as the average grade for all students. And then, so we have, almost half the kids in this report had A's. So having A's is one thing, but I've heard at Georgia Tech, admissions officers say, well, what kind of A's and in what classes? Really super, very high A's and very tough classes, okay, versus I'm in regular track classes, see if you got A's, that's not that big of a thing because grading cultures have changed across the country, especially at more affluent zip codes and at more private schools. There's been a lot more grade inflation in those areas. But everyone's on the game. We're all playing the game essentially. But it's going to be this balancing point of rigor. And there's always a question of how, pushing rigor. And honestly, if you're juniors, you're rising seniors, your courses are already set. So I'm not going to talk too much about this because essentially, and for you guys, most of you are going to be applying early somewhere, which means the last grades, junior year is the most important year academically. That's the last full year they have. And most kids are going to be applying somewhere middle October, 1st of November, and that's it. Then your grades, they're not going to see your first semester grades or second, so it's really set. What they want to see though is, do you have the level of academic rigor on your schedule as a senior? Do you have the right number of APs, IB classes, dual enrollment classes? Do you have the, for the, if you're applying to UVA, do you have 7 or 8 APs? Do you have, for their, their school? And when you mail your application, they mail the high school profile, which gives a sense of how many APs are offered, the average score achievement. We get this many 4s, this many 5s, this many 3s. They have a sense of how the kids tend to do. And so they'll put you in context of your high school. They get a sense of how you did vis-a-vis your school. And honestly, please ask questions. I'm going to probably answer them at the end, but load them up now and I'll make sure I field them all at the end. Okay. So, but then you want to, perform, and taking an AP class and getting a C is not very helpful for anybody. It's not performance. And so make sure next year you're going to be seniors, make sure you have a good, strong first semester. Those midterm grades will be the last grades anyone sees. You want to end strong because, again, grade trends matter. Even if your freshman year was pretty weak, if you can have a good, strong junior year and then a good first part of senior year, that bodes very well. That's important. There are some kids who had a really crummy sophomore year, or they want to cement in one more solid semester of grades. And for that reason, some kids don't apply early because it's more important to get that GPA up. And so then they apply regular, and they're going to lean more heavily because, if they have like a 3.2, 3.3, but they come strong and have a great senior year first semester, that factors in. And so they'd rather wait and get that GPA bump before they apply. So there are some people who defer to regular decision, those January 1st deadlines, because they had a weaker GPA earlier in their high school career. Okay. And yeah, the word rigor, I'm talking about APs, I'm talking about IBs, I'm talking about dual enrollment. There are some colleges give you credit for the honors classes, and there are definitely, we have some high schools we work with Scarsdale in New York, other places, Dalton, our kids at Dalton in New York City, that they don't have APs. We're working with many of the schools in DC area who are dropping the AP programs. And so if they don't have any APs, they're going to measure you on the merits of the rigor for your school. And with your school profile, they'll say, we offer no APs. However, we offer these advanced classes. And like kids at Scarsdale, they count the number of 400 level classes. Like, they're going to find a way to measure and quantify the academic rigor and by looking at, the courses offered in your school. But APs are a very standard way to do that, which is one of the reasons why APs have been exploding. And there are so many kids, like 5 million APs plus were taken last year. It's really become huge. All right, then activities, what to do. And the short of it is, activities are looking for continuity. They're looking for depth, looking for, the contribution, because they're trying to figure out, what are you going to bring to our college? And the kid who did, I'm part of 10 groups. I meet for an hour every month. They don't really care about that. That's something that's not that meaningful. On the Common App, they're going to ask you, the level of involvement, how many hours per week, per month, per year do you do the activity? And they're trying to figure out, so like the Honor Society, those things, they don't care about that. But it's, they're trying to identify, what are you going to bring to us? And, you have 1,000 hours of community service. Your school requires 100. Okay, we expect you'll get very, very involved in service at our school. You're going to fill that need for us. Or, you're super into robotics. You did 2 competitions. You're the robotics kid. That'll be, okay, you'll come here and you get involved with our engineering, technology, STEM stuff. It could be, you're the classics person. You're very into, or you're a theater. For me, I was really big. I was a wrestler and other things, but I was really big into music. And I did all the a cappella at my school, the octet, quartet, troubadours, musical theater. And of course, I went to Penn, and that's what I did for 4 years at Penn. And so they're trying to figure out, what are you going to bring to us? And so it's not just, I do this thing every 1 hour a month. It's no, I was doing music, 50 hours a month plus. And I ended up doing that for 4 years at Penn. So they're trying to figure that out. What are you going to bring to us? What 1 or 2 things will you contribute to our school? They want to see some consistency. Of course, things were disrupted over the pandemic, but that's pretty much behind us now. Thank the Lord. I'm going to pass that one over. So demonstrate an interest. This is a big deal. And so I mentioned before, with some of the uncertainty that's been delivered by test optional, and you don't have that important metric for some kids, they're looking more closely at how seriously are you looking at our school? Are you applying to 20 schools and we're on number 18 on your list? Or are you applying, we are top. And clearly the way you are engaging with us is meaningful. And the simple ways to engage when they come to your school and they do an info session, you show up, you put down your email, a nice professional email, and you interact with them, correspond with them. They're going to send you emails. And the word's out about this now. When they send you an email, there's something called a digital beacon, which is a single invisible pixel somewhere embedded in the email. And that pixel pings back to the server and it's a standard, Applerouth does it, anything from, MailChimp, they all give you analytics and say, was it opened? Yes, it was open. Did someone click a link? Yes. Which link? Okay, then they track you to the website. How long did you spend on the college website? Where did you look on the college? Which pages did you visit? And they're able to get a digital score effortlessly, automatically. The majority of schools in the country, they're using this thing called Slate, which is a CRM platform to help them quantify instantly your level of digital engagement with the school. The emails, the open, the website usage, and so forth. So that's one way to show interest. The other way is actually corresponding with your admissions rep. Doing virtual tours are a big deal. Corresponding, interacting with people on the tour, asking questions. And when you sign up for a virtual tour, again, they can track your interest. You're the one who asked a question. You're the one who was engaging versus you turned it on and walked away for an hour and came back. So they actually know how you're engaging. It's also easy now. It's just automatic. And then there's the old school engagement. I went to Penn. I went to the admissions office. I signed in. I did a tour. I sat down on a class. I came back twice, actually. I did a spring break trip when I was, in like March as a junior, and then I came back senior year before I applied early. And I went in October and spent a weekend, and I loved it. I'm like, this is it. I'm going ED, and that was that. But again, they saw, and so applying ED, you're telling them I'm coming if you give me an offer. But even if you apply early action or otherwise, and you do all this engagement with them, that bodes really well. And they know that kids who show up, they're serious. And so they also know first generation kids, low income kids can't always afford the plane tickets. They have some fly out dates occasionally for, low income students, but otherwise, they understand that if you actually do make the effort, it's a big deal. The other way of showing interest is many colleges are going to have an essay supplement on the Common Application. And that essay supplement, what that is you're telling them, they ask you, why do you want to go to Bates? Why do you want to go to Boat? Why do you want to go to Oberlin? Why Smith? Why Wake Forest? Why Morehouse? Why Spelman? And why? And the amount of energy you put into that essay, if you actually if you give them back their brochure, here are the top things in Atlanta, like I want to be here because you're football, because this, versus, I spent some time, I invested some hours, and I know you have this amazing program and this study abroad thing in Greece that I want to do. You have these 15 clubs, this line of research. And I know that many sophomores end up having internships with this thing. So you're telling them, I did some work. I went to your campus, and for me, writing, why do you want to go to Penn? Having gone to Penn, I could write more emotionally about the experience and the kids I talked to on campus and walking around and sitting on the class. It's like, wow, for all these reasons and more, I think Penn is the best choice for me. And so the more personal, again, you're showing interest, that can be meaningful for them. Virtual events. And there's also interviews. There are schools you can interview at. It used to be, there's some alumni interviews that they do. Sometimes you can interview on campus. There are some schools like Wake Forest where everyone interviews virtually for like 20 minutes. They've staffed up for those things. But that's one way to show some interest with the interview. And so again, there's the visits, the old school classic. Thankfully now we can actually go back to school. But the virtual visits are pretty powerful too. During the pandemic, that became a thing. It was always a small thing, suddenly blew up when people couldn't get on campus. And they found a way to really get engagement, get questions, bring other students in there, and have you get a real feel for school. And so it may save you a trip if you were building out your list for the summer, but you're considering Dartmouth. which is way off the beaten path, why I fly out to New Hampshire or not, versus, you know what, I'm going to stick to these. I'm going to Boston. I'm going over to New York. I'm doing the seaboard, but I'm not going to go to Michigan or Dartmouth or Texas. And you may be able to eliminate one or, of these far reaching ones by doing a virtual visit first, and interacting in that way. So there are ways to interact. And again, this is all showing interest to the school too. Interviews. If you do an interview, there's the alumni ones. Sometimes you interview for a certain kind of program, and you want to prep a little bit. You want to have some questions for them. If you have a few interviews, do your favorite, your top choice last if you can. And we don't know just the relative weights on interviews. They tend to be a little bit lower. I mean, if your academics aren't there, the interviews are relevant. But a lot of kids, the academics are there, the testing is there, everything is there, and they're trying to find these little plus factors, and a good interview can be meaningful. And so that's something to consider and think about if they offer them on campus. And the question is, will I be doing an interview with an alum and they'll fill out a sheet, or will I actually be interviewing with the person who reads for my region, which is very different. They may know my name at the interview. So that can be a factor as well. Then there are letters of recommendation. And, it seems like those have been playing a little bit of a larger role in a test optional world. When you pull out testing, everything that's left becomes a little bit larger, which makes sense because testing is a pretty big deal. And for many students, testing is still a big deal. But for those who apply without testing, the other factors do loom larger, which is very natural. And so when it comes to this, you want to be mindful of who are the teachers who are going to go to bat for you and vouch for you and put time into your rec letter. So it's not the teacher who I had the highest GPA and I had a 97 in their class. I'm going to have them with the recognition. Don't do that. You want to pick the teacher. I mean, ideally, the grades are decent, but the ones who they really know you, they've talked with you, they've interacted with you, they've seen you, show up in class, be intellectually curious, have engagement, have resilience. All these things they're trying to evaluate students on, these non-cognitive factors. You want a teacher who likes you. There are teachers who get, kids aren't very thoughtful, and the teachers just mail it in and give them a boilerplate, pretty meaningless rubber stamp rec letter, and the admissions officers know that instantly. And so it's choosing people skillfully. I chose my French teacher, who wasn't maybe the world's best, writer, but she knew me for several years, and we had a friendship, and we were friendly for a good 30 years. Suzanne Cohen, she was a fabulous teacher. And my other teacher, my rec writer, was Helen Smith. I had her as a sophomore for AP Euro. I had her as a senior for government and Comp Pol. And we're still friends to this day. We go out to dinner, 25 years later. So in the grand scheme, you want to find the people who are going to, who care about you. And again, it could be you have a lower grade in that class, but they saw you work your tail off, try hard, overcome adversity, overcome obstacles, XYZ, but they know you, they see you, and they care about you. Choose them. And sometimes they're going to specify if, they want one in the STEM, one in the language arts areas. They may ask you for a different recommendation from a coach or a pastor or someone you're involved with. Give them exactly what they want. Don't go over. If they want 3 recs, don't send 5. The name of the game is follow directions. You're not getting extra credit if you submit more than what they want, because again, they're reading thousands of applications on, one of my colleagues in my graduate school program, we had dinner one night. He said, "Want to see my homework for the night?" He went and showed me a tub of 100 apps for that evening. Said, "This is tonight's homework." He's going to read 3,000 apps that cycle. So it's just like it's streamlined, it's quick. They read these things. So you want to give them exactly what they want because they know how to read it, and follow directions essentially. Okay. Then there's the summertime coming up. You are entering your last summer before you're a senior. It's an important summer. What you do. I went summer camp, and for me, summer camp was a mainstay. I loved it, and I think I may have written about that in one of my essays. I love working with kids, and lo and behold, I've spent 21 years of my career working with kids. But definitely this summer, you want to make sure there's something, some form of engagement, whether it's employment, summer camp, whether you're interning for at least a couple of weeks of it, somewhere in some capacity, because you're trying to write a coherent application, and you're saying, I'm interested in this program, this major, my course taking lines up with it, my activities line up with it, my interests, my engagement. Like there's a coherent narrative here, trying to, how do you understand who I am in a thin slice snapshot? So things should align in some way. Not that you have to be so narrowly tailored, but it's like, I say I like this, I'm writing about this, and I end up doing something so far from that, like, it seems like there's some incoherence in the story, in the narrative. Camp is great. Volunteer work is lovely as well. Some schools require it, some don't. But again, something of interest, of merit, besides just hanging out for the summer. Some students are going to end up finishing their testing over the summer, because now there are, SATs in June. In August, there's a July ACT and a June one, September. And then if some of you will be working on your lists, trying to narrow down, understanding that I may be applying ED or early action. It could be an October 15th or November 1st deadline. Some of you may be doing some homework, doing some flying around, doing some research over the summertime. And if you go to a school, it's ideally if they have some school in session, so you have to see kids. If you go during like a total break, then you're seeing buildings and bricks. But the real feeling of a campus is the students and the student life and the interaction and the kind of kids. There were certain schools I walked around in for 10 minutes. I'm like, this is not for me. And that was it. It was like, decisions making, they're partly rational, but a lot of them are emotional. A lot of what defines where you apply to school, where you want to go to school is feelings. So looking at buildings won't give you the same experience as looking at the students. How are they talking to each other? Are they fun? Are they engaging? Are they just head down books? Are they grinds? Are they social? And that's one of the reasons I really like Penn. It seemed like it was a nice balance. It was fun. People were having a good time. There was music on the Locust Walk. I'm like, I want to be here for 4 years. And so so it's better than going when they're actually in session. And then some of you will be starting some of the essay work, the common application, the essays, the essay supplements, totally appropriate because those things release this summer, and you can start to work on those apps. Because again, those deadlines come up quickly, and your school will have their own, you don't want to be grinding out essays and applications when you're starting your APs or doing it's. Ideally, you have some of that already cooked. And the summertime is great for that when you have something. Also, one note, the same as doing your essays. Ideally, if you can, if you're still in school now, if you haven't asked your teachers to write your rec letters, many teachers are okay writing your rec letters over the summer. Because again, once they start the fall, they're slammed. They're writing all the letters. And best practice here is you ask them, if you can now, are you willing to do my rec letter? And then give them a synopsis, a one-pager of everything you did in their class. Because again, they have a lot more students than you have teachers. And they may have commingled, they can go back and reference their notes. But if you say, here are the projects, here are the things I covered, I did this. So make it easy for them to write a nuanced, informed, thoughtful rec letter. Don't make them do work, make it easy for them. And so the more that helps them, and in the summertime, they may knock out their 30 recs and then they can relax and they're not stressed, come October. Okay. Let's talk about testing and the world of assessments. And I'll make sure it's 8:34. I want to stop. I'm going to blitz through some of this because this is a pretty big deck, but honestly, I'd rather just talk to you and take questions. So I'm going to give myself a hard stop at 15 minutes. 8:39. All right, let's do it. Again, this is going to be fast and furious, but I will mail you the deck. It has plenty of nuance. Yeah, we know this. We know APs are exploding. I'm going to go quickly through this. APs are huge. Things that matter most to colleges. This actually is pretty important, this slide. This was from a couple-year-old survey of several hundred college admissions directors. What do you care most about for getting into college? And this is, they fill out something, it's called the Common Data Set, CDS. And they answer grades, very, very important, first and foremost. And then academic solids are more important, but even, all classes. Academic rigor, that's your APs, that's your IBs, that's dual enrollment, that's some honors depending on the college. Then testing, then you see that those are all very important, then things drop off. Essays, lower, demonstrated interest, lower. In some schools, about a third of schools do not do demonstrated interest. And so you can find this out very quickly and very easily. If you type in the college to which you're applying, let's say I'm looking at Tulane, type in the word Tulane, common data set. CDS 2021, and then it'll tell you, you know, you'll see this grid for that school. They'll say, do they care about teacher recs? Do they care about activities? Do they care about interviews? Do they care about, and again, half of schools do not use interviews. And about 20% give it, consider it or moderate importance. That bottom one doesn't exist anymore. Those are now gone. But this essentially could give you a sense of what matters. But grades and testing are pretty darn important, because if you can't hack it academically, the rest doesn't really matter. You may be amazing unless you are a recruited athlete or you have a real skill they need, in which case they'll throw academic support and resources to make sure you pass, to make sure you're on the playing field. And so, but otherwise, if you're a regular academic kid, the grades matter a lot, because they don't want kids who transfer out, who can't, because that actually hurts them, because they're assessed and graded and ranked on 4-year and 6-year graduation rates. And kids who bail on the school, it hurts their rankings. So they don't want kids who can't handle it. That's why grades and rigor and testing are always the first. Short and sweet, SAT is more advanced with reading. ACT is more advanced with STEM, science content. They overlap 80%. And many of you have already taken these tests if you're rising seniors. Very similar assessments. Timing is, you know, the SAT is oh, wow. Is everyone still there? Okay, guys, I'm so sorry about that. Something has happened, but we're back on. Let me come back there. I hope I didn't lose too many of you. So just one, is everything good? Let me make sure it's okay. Okay, everything's back. Excellent. All right, so where we were talking about testing. And at this point now, many of you are already deep in it. Ideally, you take the test 3 times. And that's from looking at tens of thousands of student data points, that typically students hit their best score after 3 rounds. Some are 1 and done, some are 2 and done, but typically you see some incremental improvements to the 3rd test. There are no easy or hard test dates. Take it when it makes sense for your schedule. That's an important thing. Things that matter: practice testing, having a goal. These are meaningful things. At this point now, you're going to be seniors. So we are at the very end, which means we have ahead of us the June SAT, the June ACT. We have the July ACT, the August SAT, the September ACT, then October. And for many schools, October is the end if you're applying early. And then if you're applying regular decision, you have November and December. So there's still many ahead of us. That's like 1, 2, 3, 4 ACTs, and then 1, 2, 3. You know, so there's plenty of time for testing that remains ahead of you. A few quick things. This is not going to affect you. Eventually, if you have younger kids, you'll have computer-based testing, and by section, that's not for seniors. And then for the College Board, they got rid of their essay and their tests. And we know there's an adaptive test coming, but that's going to affect current freshmen and nobody else. So this is not for rising seniors. APs, whatever. But they're already done. They're in the bank. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, in terms of optional admissions, let's kind of go through this whole thing of test optional. There's test required, optional, flexible, and blind. And so test required, there aren't that many schools in the country, about 5% who are test required. The military academies, some of the state schools, MIT, Georgetown. And there are not going to be a majority of schools ever again that are test required. Tennessee just joined. North Carolina, they said they were going to do it, and then they retracted, said, give us 2 more years. Texas, UT Austin said, we're going to do it. And a year and a half, they said, wait, we're going to wait and see. So they're kind of putting their foot in the water and back and forth. But Florida, everybody. Georgia was everyone. Now they're looking at the flagship schools because there are some problems with enrollment at the lower selective institutions. Like the Valdosta State, they're not filling enough student seats. The pandemic did hurt enrollment across the country for the lower level schools. The schools were selective, gangbusters, but the lower end schools, there are a number of kids who just kind of hopped out of the college pool, which is really sad, especially the 2 years, the associate's degrees and community colleges. So many of them are just waiving testing requirements, but the flagship schools, they're holding firm. So UTK, Knoxville, and then we also have MIT, you have Georgetown, and there'll be others coming soon. And so the South, one of our colleagues said the South, testing will rise again, essentially. He said, wait for Carolinas, they're coming. Wait for Alabama. Wait for, potentially Mississippi, potentially, but and then there's a question of, will UVA go back to testing? We're going to find out. But it looks like many schools are still, whatever happened last year, keep it going. But it seems like schools are starting to edge back in to test required, especially in the southern schools. But optional, what that means is if you have no testing, it's fine. Kids are getting in without testing. And they'll look at your application. They'll look more closely at other things than testing. But, this is now the dominant thing in the country. So there are 1,800 schools in the US who are test optional. And they were under 1,000 before the pandemic. So this was the big story. Now it's just here. Now it's what it is. But again, one of the big changes was the pop in application numbers. That was really a huge deal. So many colleges increased their apps by 50%, by 100% at Colgate. That was tremendous. So schools became very selective. They were before, now these numbers are even greater in 2022. And so, it's definitely a trend. Schools that were selective really gained. But schools who were less selective didn't necessarily do as well. IVs are just ridiculous. And that's kind of a thing. So part of it, even if, you can't apply to 10 IVs because it isn't how it works. There are people who are applying to 10 schools getting no acceptances if they're not building a good list, a good mixed list of your foundational schools. Likelihood of getting in, is 70% or higher. You have your likelies, where it's 50% chance. Then you have your reaches, maybe 20% chance, if not less. And you need, you have to have, very strong foundations, your likelies, and then your reaches. And if you don't have a good mix, you can end up getting nothing. And there are people who have good grades. There just aren't enough spots at these super selective schools. And there's, I read something that there are 30,000, the top 20 schools, they have 30,000 seats for the freshman class. But again, the number of valedictorians there are 30,000 high school, there aren't enough spots. Kids with perfect testing, there aren't enough spaces at these schools. And also they're really prioritizing diversity, first gen kids, international kids. So that makes a smaller allotment for domestic kids. So it's tougher than it was before. Things are different. These schools have different priorities now. And so you have to have everything right, but also have a list which is reasonable. And you can't, your fallbacks can't be, Tulane or, that could be a reach. One of my students applied everywhere. He had 1530 SAT, great, everything else, got dinged at all the UCs, UC Irvine, he was really shocked where he didn't get in. But that's something that's happening across the country. It's harder to predict who's going to get in. It's harder to make a list of your likelies than before, because things are moving. What colleges want is changing, if they're giving more spots for different kinds of students and so forth. But again, testing. So test flexible. And honestly, a lot of schools are not on paper test flexible, but they're acting as such. So if you do not submit an SAT score, let's say your testing was really weak, you have a good GPA, you have a 3.7, 3.8 unweighted, you had a 22 on the ACT, you have dyslexia, problem solving, you have some timing issues, and you're not going to get up to where you have to be for testing. But competitive with a 31, 32, it's not worth the investment. I had this conversation yesterday with one of my colleagues. You know what? Let's just ride on everything else. Getting a 9-point lift, I probably wouldn't spend the money if I were you as a parent. Let's just go with the grades and everything else. But in that case, if I'm not going to send them a test score for the ACT, then I should send them other testing that's strong. If I send them a string of 4s and 5s on my AP exams, well, that matters a lot too, because they need something standardized. because GPAs are not standardized, and GPAs have been inflated, but test scores have not been inflated. There's still similar number of 4s and 5s given on the AP exam. So if you send them, I'm not going to send you anything for the SAT, ACT, but I got a 5 on chemistry, I got a 5 on US history. Suddenly, oh, they put you in context of, they can see something. So that in that case does contribute. It's part of the application, it's part of the conversation. And so test blind, that's mostly California. The UC system and Cal State, most of our kids are applying to Cal State, Fullerton, those schools, but UC is definitely a draw. UC, UCLA, Berkeley, Irvine, UC Riverside, Merced. There's many, many good schools out there. And though they're very tough to get into these days. But those schools, you can have a 36 and then UCLA that couldn't care less. It's not even part of the conversation. There are a few schools like that. Worcester Poly is doing an 8-year. Catholic isn't that selective. They're blind. Northern Michigan, Illinois, they're not that selective. Loyola, these schools are now test blind, but St. Mary's in Texas, a small Catholic school. But these aren't like the powerhouse schools. Worcester Poly is one of the only like research-based school. And then you have UC and Cal State. Okay, so test optional is here and it's going to remain the dominant. I have 3 minutes. I do want questions. That was a promise. The majority of schools are going to stay with this for 3 to 5 years. Some of them are waiting to see inputs, outputs, give us a couple more years of data. But test optional does not mean test blind at all. And good test scores make a difference to admission. As long as they read test scores, having a strong test score is better than not having a test score. Period, paragraph. It's going to strengthen. It for sure as hell doesn't mean you're getting into one of these 2 super top schools. But if I have a 3.7, I have 6 APs and I have a 35, that's better than 3.7, 7 APs and no testing. So it's to your advantage. At certain schools, it matters more, especially from certain populations where on average, the majority of kids from your high school, a very resource high school, good zip code or private school, the majority that have testing, it's harder for you from that school without testing if the majority of your peers applying to the same school have strong testing. So again, but the game is up. Everyone knows to send strong testing, don't send weak testing. They don't want to see a weak, the same as they don't want to see a 2 or 3 on the AP most cases. They want to see 4s and 5s. So don't send a lower score than in their middle range. Cornell was clear. If test scores aren't there, other things matter more. Makes sense. It's just algorithms. Then there's a question of should I submit or not? Submission of scores is the big deal. It can affect merit-based aid. There are schools, Wabash was offering money for test scores and grades. Alabama, my niece applied from Richmond, Virginia. She was offered, she had a 1390 on the SAT and had like a 3.9. They offered her the UA Scholar, which turned tuition from $30,000 a year to $6,000 a year. So that's an incredible savings. And so they offered her $96,000 in merit-based aid, not for need, but for merit. So there's schools like this who offer these. Tennessee scholarships. There are many schools who offer scholarships. I live in Georgia, and the Zelmo scholarship, you get free tuition if you have a 1200 or a 26 on the ACT and above, and like a 3.8, 3.738. So ultimately, Georgia, many southern schools are giving these merit-based scholarships. So submission rates are about half of kids are submitting test scores, but schools that are selective, it's closer to 70%. And then we're seeing more kids being more strategic, where their test scores are going to these 5 schools and not to these 5 schools, because they understand my testing will help me here and hurt me here. And so my niece applied to like 10 schools, got into 6. But like Tulane, they said, don't send anything below a 1430. She didn't, she got into Tulane and they offered her some merit aid because of her really great grades. South Carolina didn't give her money, but her test score is there. UGA, she got in, didn't offer her money, but her test scores matter because tests are required at Georgia. And so it was kind of this back and forth. She sent test score not to UVA, but different schools, different approaches. And we see here some data that schools that are more selective get more applications. Makes absolute sense. And also by major matters a lot. That if I'm applying to an engineering program or a business program, I'm more likely to send my test scores, and it's going to matter more than if I'm applying to a gen ed program or, something that's more humanities based. So, because you want to showcase your math scores, and that's where getting a 34 on math matters. Like, oh, you're ready for the academic rigor of our physics department or of our finance department and so forth. The question becomes, did test submitters have an edge? I'm going to skip this slide and show you this one. So Emory Tech, applying to Emory, if kids with test scores got in at a rate of 17%, kids with no testing got in at 8.6%. At Georgia Tech, kids with test scores got in 1 out of 5 kids, without 1 out of 10 kids. So it would appear in UVA, similar numbers, that there is some advantage. However, one of the caveats is correlation or collinearity, that kids with strong test scores tend to also have strong grades and academic rigor and other good things going for them. But I've talked to an Emory rep who said, no, if I have 2 kids from the same school, similar grades, similar GPA, one sends me a 34, one sends me nothing, that 34, that's a slight advantage. That's just in that category. Again, other things are comparing everything, but ultimately testing, that's where it's causal, not correlational. And so trying them, we believe it's smart, having a baseline, figure out, then do I send them? Is it going to help or hurt is the question. And, STEM and business test scores do get in at a higher rate. And part of it is look at their middle 50 range. If I'm in the bottom, I may withhold it. If I'm in the middle or the top, send it. It's going to help. And there are certain scores below which you shouldn't send them. If you have a score well below their middle 50 range, withhold that score. And then also by major matter, if I'm going to be a fine arts major, it's my portfolio. Performing arts, it's my audition. Your testing is less meaningful for those kind of programs. Rick Clark, colleague, friend, said, if you want us to see it, you think it's strengthened, send it. Otherwise, if you're really, really low, don't send it. Please withhold it. And also your grades. If you have a stellar GPA and rigor and all the average testing, I may withhold my testing and just stand on the merits of my grades and rigor. That's a thing. And then if I have a really strong math score in there, like I have a 780 in math, even though my total composite score is a little bit low for them, I would still send it if I'm applying to be a finance or nursing or chemistry or computer science major, to make sure they see my 780 in math, even though my verbal was lower than what they're looking for. That's the whole 1 weak, 1 strong thing. And vice versa, I'm applying to a writing program, my math was weak, but I'm applying to a writing program and I have a 780 in math. I'm sorry, in verbal. That should be part of the conversation. Don't send weak scores, period, paragraph. Treat every school differently. Here's one past example, Swarthmore, their mid-50 range, 1380 to 1540. If I have anything over a 1470, send it for sure. Below a 1380, probably not. The gray area is that third quartile. I have a 1390. Maybe I withhold it. I have a 1460. I probably send it. And also depending upon my grades and if I have a strong section score in there. Okay. And then also be mindful that score ranges from a year ago are a little bit skewed. And often what I would do is have you look back a year prior to the 2020 common data set and look at their incoming freshman class. Here's an example of that. So for the class of 2020, for UGA, their middle 50 was a 1220 to a 1390. Then the pandemic hits, everyone with low scores withholds them. Then their middle shifts way up to a 1350 to a 1390. If someone asks me, hey, Jed, I have a 1340, should I send it? Yes, 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 and yes. Because these are pandemic effects. And I look back to pre-pandemic to get a sense of what's competitive for that school. Same with BU, 30 to a 34 was half the class. The kick is a 32. They asked me, should I send it to BU? I say, yeah, even though the range has popped up or, for this class, or a 33. So be mindful of, there's been some inflation by eliminating the lower scoring kids. Penn is an extreme example. They got rid of their lower scoring students, and then suddenly half of their class has between a 35 and 36, and that means a quarter has over 36. So a parent would ask me, should I have a 34 submitted? Yes, 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 yes. If 34, send it, please. It's important. Here's some example of some of the schools, some of the pops. Everything popped. Emory popped, Colgate popped, Davidson, all these schools. Yale didn't even give test scores. Tulane popped a good bit. And so it was funny. They told my niece, if you have below a 1430, don't send it. Whereas a year and a half ago, like that would have been a fine score for Tulane. So it's interesting. Look at Vermont, they popped over 100 points. But if I'm applying to Vermont and I have a 1250, I would still submit it, even though the pandemic effects bumped it up so high. All right, so Applerouth, we do 3 things: academic tutoring, AP tutoring, test preparation, obviously, and we help kids prep for getting them more organized, better at self-managing. That's what I do for my work as a tutor. I do executive functioning coaching. I help kids make sure their lives are organized and they're ready for high school and then for college. That's a lot of our work is helping kids get ready for that college transition. So that's stuff that we do. So now I'm going to pause and I'm going to open up question and answer. So here we go. It is now, I'm a little bit late, but I'll stay a little bit late. All right, so we talked about ED is more important than early action. Is it concerning to admissions officers if I get mostly B's in my high school classes, but mostly A's in my college classes? I'm in an early college program. I wouldn't say concerning, because again, in terms of grade trends, what they want to see is when you get to more advanced content, how do you do? They don't want to see a kid who was a rock star as a freshman, but every year beyond that, they start falling apart. Because APs are like college level classes. If you begin getting C's as a junior, they don't like that, because then they're worried, are you going to be getting failing grades once you're in college? But if your grades are getting better as you progress, that's a nice grade trend. They enjoy that. So if you're getting A's in your dual enrollment classes, your college classes, lovely. Does being in a unique program like a global STEM help? Yeah, if you're in a focused program that's rigorous, or if you're going for like the International Baccalaureate Diploma, or if you're going to be an AP scholar and you're doing this focused line of work, for sure. That can be part, especially for the narrative. If it all makes sense, I'm in a global STEM program, I've taken the physics and chemistry and this, and then I'm applying to a STEM field, and my activities and my internships, like it all makes sense. There's a coherent narrative, absolutely. But if I'm in a global STEM program that I'm applying to something totally different, or a music, well, that may not give you the same bump, as long as you're feeding the same storyline. Is there any consideration for leadership programs, volunteer work, that they consider? Well, again, this is going to fall into the non-cognitives like leadership. Yes, it does factor in this, but less so like big state schools where it's more algorithmic. What are your numbers? What are your, versus the schools where everyone has good grades and scores. Then it gets down to the more narrow, the leadership and the character and the essays and things like that. So yes, it does, but it'll vary by school, but smaller schools, liberal arts schools, for sure, more selective schools typically. But often like the big states, that may not count. And one of the things, you type in common data set for the school, you can find out, do they actually give credit like for work or for volunteer things? But it's not going to be nearly as big as your academic solids, obviously, because they really want to see the numbers first. Numbers are very important. Is there any advantage to applying early decision? Early for regular decision? Would it be okay to wait till the deadline date to ensure the application is stronger regarding, is there a disadvantage? So you're looking at applying the regular deadlines. That's January 1st. If I submit my application, let's say a month and a half early, is there a real pop? It's going to depend upon the school in terms of when they begin to read. Some of them begin to read them as they come in. Some of them wait till everything's in. Depends on how many are on the road. They have to finish their early rounds first before regular rounds. But it really depends. But I would say at many schools, it's not going to be, they're going to wait until they finish all the early rounds, and then they're going to start reading for regular. But I wouldn't think that would be a big advantage. Now, schools that are rolling admission, absolutely. Applying early matters tremendously. Or if there is something called priority deadlines, if you apply by this date, there's an advantage versus waiting later. So what would have been a yes in October becomes a no by December 15th, as they fill more of that class, those kind of things. So if there's priority deadlines or rolling admission, early matters. But for regular, I haven't heard many folks say send them early. They're often going to read them together, and they're not going to penalize someone for giving it on the Jan 1st deadline. Okay. All right. How about when you have a great GPA grades, taking AP dual enrollment classes, but your AHT score was horrible? I got really anxious and tend not to test well, especially I know I need merit. Okay. In this case, part of it is looking at how strong your grades and rigor and how low your scores. If you're within like 3 or 4 or 5 points on the ACT, or we can get you up there. If you're 9, 10 points away, I wouldn't worry about testing. That was the advice I gave the mother. Her kid went from a 21 to a 22. I'm like, you know what? You need a 31 to be competitive. You're looking at Auburn, other schools. I wouldn't worry about it. But if you're within, it again depends how close you are. But if your grades are phenomenal, your rigor is rock solid, your testing is really weak, don't worry about it, because there are many schools apply broadly, and there are definitely my niece again got merit. She had no testing for Tulane, and it was a pretty meaningful award. It ended up being like 16, even like 20 grand off per year from Tulane. So yeah, there is money out there for kids with great grades and great rigor too. Where can we find schools which value demonstrated interest? Not all schools value this. VA Tech said they don't, right? Many big state schools don't, the Ivies don't. Again, you type in the word common data set, and they'll tell you, you go through their factors for admission, now they'll tell you if they value DI or not. And they're very clear. And again, many schools do not. About a third of schools don't care, but 2/3 do care, and some of them care a lot. They may put that in the considerate or moderate bucket. Does applying for the FAFSA, if you are not high need, interfere with or hinder your students' ED application? Thank you. And this, I've heard different perspectives on this one. If you know there isn't a snowball's chance in hell you're getting any financial aid, do I even bother, or do I let them know I'm a full pay kid? And others might say, if at any point during the 4 years you might consider applying for, I've heard some financial aid folks say, just do the FAFSA, even if they know you're going to be a full pay kid. I've heard others say, don't check the box. So honestly, I've heard different perspectives from different financial experts. You might want to talk to your high school counselor and see if they have perspective. But I remember I've given many talks to this guy, Stuart. He says, you know what, fill it out. So I've heard competing things on that question. So definitely a good question, but I think it's not conclusively answered. Can my son skip staying on campus the first year and commute from home to college? Yeah. Once you're accepted, you aren't necessarily applying for on-campus housing. Though it'll depend on the school. There are commuter schools. There are schools where the residents, they want you to live on campus. So honestly, the answer is that's going to vary. But a lot of schools, for sure, they're going to let you figure out housing on your own. Some of them guarantee housing. Some of them require you to stay on the dorm, in a certain part of campus for the first part. Some smaller schools, but it's going to be on a school-by-school basis. But the majority of schools, you get to choose where you live. But they, maybe they can't guarantee housing and so forth. What's an alumni interview? So I am asked every year by Penn to go and interview like 10 kids. And what I'm going to do is go, because again, there's people I can do there are hundreds of kids applying from Atlanta. I can meet them and do an online interview. And the alumni, we have less weight. Essentially, is the kid okay? Are they offensive? Are they nice? As an alum, I have a checklist of 10 things and factors. Okay, I write it up, send it in. It's a little plus factor. It's nice. There's a chance for the student to show some interest, a chance for the student to ask questions about me. And I'm going to write, kid was great. But it carries more weight when the admissions office does the interview, obviously. But yeah, some schools let their alumni base get involved. Is it okay to have 2 science instructors write rec letters if I'm going to be, is that my major? I think, yeah. I think if you're looking at being a certain major and then you have 2 teachers who vouch for you, I think it's appropriate. If they specify it's open, if they let you, some of them will say we want from this grade, or we want from these categories of classes. But if they don't specify and this is your major, I think it makes sense. Okay. Did you say 30 LOR? Do we need that many? Letters of recommendation. Oh, you do not need 30 rec letters. But the example was, if they say we want 2, give them 2. If they say you can submit extra, don't go nuts, because they're not going to read them. They don't have time for them. I would follow the confines. And if, maybe you send a 3rd one, if it's an optional one, you have your lacrosse coach write something, but don't go overboard. It's really not going to sway things. If your fundamentals aren't there, these rec letters typically are not going to have that kind of sway that I hope they would. If you send scores separately, are they going to be added to your application? If you send scores separately, they're going to update your application. Yes, if I have a score from the February test and I mail that. And often what's happening now is there's score self-reporting where I choose on the Common App, I'm going to send these test scores to this school, not to that school, and I can go through each one and send or not send. And then if you are accepted, that's when you're going to send the official score report. That's a big thing. It's called, student self-reporting, which got a huge push about 3 years ago. So hundreds of schools now do that to save you a few bucks. But if you can send them and they'll update things. Zell Miller gives free tuition to students in Georgia for Georgia residents. The same as there are scholarships in Florida. Like Florida has been test required since they never stopped being test required because they have all these scholarships tied to performance and residency in Florida. So Georgia, if I have a 3.7 and if you have a 3.0, you can get the Hope Scholarship. This is all funded by the Georgia lottery money. So 3.0, I can get tuition that's very, very discounted at the Georgia schools, which is one of the reasons that UGA and Tech have gotten so damn good is because kids are looking around, I can spend 80 grand at Bates, or I can spend for my room and board at Tech, and then get recruited by Google and Facebook. Like, wow. Well, that's a very, so these state schools have gotten so good because of these merit-based scholarships. But yeah, Zell Miller, the Hope Scholarship came about in 94, I believe, 93 and 94, and it has made Georgia a backup school to a reach school because now we have so many kids staying in Georgia because the economics of it are phenomenal. Should I wait until I get my scores, send them before I get them for free? Wait, because again, if the score is junky, don't send it automatically. Make sure you spend the extra $10. And then I recommend strongly, because there are times you have a bad day and I want to see it before I send it. As a junior, I had a tough academic year and I had many personal issues. It happens. Well, this affected my chances of getting into good schools. All my other school years were A+ averages, or junior year was B+. You can write about it in the supplemental info section. Is there anything else you want us to know? That there were things you were going through. I have students who went through depression because of the pandemic, loss of a parent, eating disorders, diseases, problems at home. I had a grandfather come live with us. He was sick. I've seen a lot of things. That's where you tell them what happened and you can write about that. And that can be meaningful. If there's an anomalous, that's kind of strange. A+, B+, what happened? You can actually explain, and that'll become part of the conversation when they look at your application. I already sent the scores, they're below the mark. What should I do? Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. The majority of schools are going to super score, or look at your best scores. They're trying to look for reasons to let you in. But personally, I send only good scores if I can help it. So I wouldn't sweat it. Don't even just onward and upward. Next thing. When you talk test scores, are you showing super scores? When I talk test scores, well, yeah, schools that super score are going to report super scores, and that helps them look better and smarter. So in many schools, super score the SAT, and more than ever, their schools do doing the ACT as well. Are community colleges good at public schools? Well, the beauty of community colleges is it's kind of the back door to top schools. There are many flagship schools in the country like UGA and Tech and UVA and Maryland that have guaranteed feeder relationships, and even the honors program feeders. If you go to this 2-year community college, get your associates and maintain a 3.7 or above, you are guaranteed admission to UVA, to Georgia, and even guaranteed entry into the honors program. So community college can be righteous. And especially if you can't get in the front door, like you apply to UVA, you don't have the testing. Because once you have 2 years of school, your test scores are invisible. Like transfers, their test scores don't matter because grades in college are the best predictor of grades in college. And additionally, when colleges report for US News and World Report, they report their freshman class averages for testing. So our freshman class had an average GPA of 3.9, average SAT of 1550. They don't report sophomore or junior test scores. That's why it's kind of the back door. One of my best friends, Mikey D, he's from Jersey. he couldn't get into Penn his first year. He went to Rutgers. He had a 3.7, 3.8 at Rutgers, and then he transferred to Penn. And then he ended up with not a Rutgers Penn degree, but a Penn degree. One of my best friend in the world, David, he didn't have a good score on the LSAT. Yeah, it was a few points shy, got turned down from all the top law schools. So he went to University of Georgia. At UGA, he crushed it. His 1L, he had a 3.9, top 10% of his class. And then guess what? He fell in love with a girl. He transferred to Columbia. Does David have a UGA Columbia degree? No, he has a Columbia Law degree. So the transfer thing, if you don't mind missing a year of the experience, it is a way to get a better degree than often you can get on the front end. So transferring is awesome. Community colleges are awesome. Big fan. Economically, they're a deal. Do you provide college advising services, helping students with this stuff? We have partners. If you tell us where you are, what you're looking for, we can send you the names of 3 or 4 people who are fabulous. And those people do this for a living. Our lane's academics. We do executive functioning coaching, test preparation, and we help kids get A's, but we don't do the advising. I just know enough. I've been in this space a long time, going on 21 years now. Okay. My extracurricular activities are not strong. My academics are pretty strong. How will that affect my chances? I joined clubs my junior year, did a movement and pandemics, so I didn't get that much opportunity. And they understand the pandemic was very disruptive. There's going to be discontinuity of activities, but also depends on where you're looking. You can still write a really great essay, have good recommendations. Activities, they matter only so much. For the super duper tough schools, the top Ivies, they're going to, because all their kids have good grades and scores, so they really do look deeper. But for many schools and big state school, other places, having great grades and scores is enough. And so it's going to vary, but the schools that are super selective, they often do want to see some good activities. And so, but again, just make sure you push, write baller essays, get good recommendations, use this summer, get something under your belt, and do the best you can. In the SAT, if your highest math was April, highest English was June, how do you submit? It's called super scoring. And in many cases, you self-report my April math, my verbal in June. But so that's self-reporting, but when you send the official score reports, they send the whole thing. They can't just send one thing. But colleges, they super score. They take the April math, they take the June verbal, and that's all they look at in committee. Some admin or some computer backends, it pulls it right up. So all they're looking at is your top super score. So that's why it's called. So super scoring is powerful, which is why I take it more than once. I think 3 times. Leadership roles. If you haven't gotten leadership, is it bad? Well, I wasn't student government. I wasn't team captain of wrestling. I wasn't, a peer leader. However, I got involved with my youth group, and I was the president as a senior. I led this. We had like this festival. It was a Perm festival, and so I got some experience leading, managing, and that was leadership. So it's leadership somewhere. It could be, you're an Eagle Scout or you're a Girl Scout at the highest. You got, in some capacity, you showed some leadership somewhere, and it can be in school, out of school. It's okay, but they're trying to figure out, are you the kind of person who eventually might lead? And I did. I ended up being the business manager of our a cappella group, or I was able to manage some things. So having something that you've done to show you have some skills, some executive skills, is not a bad thing. But if you don't have them, it's okay. You don't have to have them, but you can stretch. And writing about you ran this section of a thing, or you were in charge of this part of the Arab League, or whatever you did, as some kind of leadership thing. Is it better to take an AP and get a B, or take a regular and get a B? Oh, well, you want to take the AP and get a B versus a regular and get a B, for sure. AP is more impressive than a regular class. I'm 28, looking for a 33. My testing skills are the best. I have volunteer work. I have two-year internship is my dream school. Am I pretty competitive? Depends on your dream school. A 33 again, if you're applying to Stanford, MIT, and do you have a 35 in math? They want to see a really strong math score. So it really depends. If I'm looking at a liberal arts school, I'm looking at Bowdoin, I'm looking at, then a 33 is great. It depends on the school to which you're applying. So everything is different. And internships are lovely. And so, but in terms of an internship at your dream school, that doesn't really give you an edge. I mean, it shows you're interested, but you have to have the academics first, because you could have everything. You could have went to all their summer programs, everything else, but you have to have the grades and the ability to really thrive at that school first and foremost. Are non-residents living in the US for many years given any importance or specialty, or are they not able to get federal aid? Non-residents who've been here, who've come over, like they're not going to get financial aid, but you tell a different story. Someone coming from China versus someone who's been in a boarding school here for 4 years, they're going to have had different experiences, they'll have different recommendations. The colleges will they'll still consider you a native if you're from, from China or from Brazil. And that gives them some diversity in terms of their geographic diversity. So there is some consideration of that, but yeah, there's not going to be FAFSA or student aid for non-residents, but not federal student aid. There's sometimes they have scholarships and so forth. But yeah, I think as they're building their diversity deck, you could be a place that helps make the school more diverse. To confirm, if one has a good amount of rigor in grades, but not a strong SAT, would one just not submit that score? If your academics are really, really strong, grades are great, rigor is great, testing is relatively weak, I wouldn't submit your test scores. It's going to be on a case by, and it could be my 26 is good enough for University of Iowa, but it's not great for Smith or Amherst, or so I submit it to this school, I don't submit it here. And so the exact same score, it can be, I submit to 5, withholding 5, or it could be, I'm applying 10 schools, I send it to 2 schools, to my foundation schools, but I don't send to any of my likelies or reaches. That's totally appropriate. All right, you got a 504 with extra time. Is it important to include an application or not include? Should guidance counselors' recommendations include this info, or is it better to disclose it once you're accepted? Well, if you're going to need a lot of academic support, you don't have to include it in terms of your supplemental info, but you want to find out, is there going to be, what kind of accommodations are given in the school, what kind of academic support, resource center, is there tutoring? You want to, find out what they offer, but you don't, I have plenty of kids with 504s and who don't mention it anywhere because it's really not relevant. There's a whole thing about it's protected. If you have a disability, they can't discriminate. So by no means must you disclose, but I would do some homework and find out what kind of supports they offer. So when you're going to that school, like some schools offer big support and great support. Some schools philosophically offer very little. So find out in advance. You can make a phone call, but you don't have to put in your application. What happens if you've been to different schools during high school? Do they only check the school profile from the school you graduated from? Well, no, they actually are looking at, the transcripts. It's an interesting question, actually, because the school profile it tends to be from the school, like your final school. Will they get a profile from the earlier school? I'm not sure. Or do they just port the grades over? So honestly, I can't give you a good answer about that. I don't know if they're going to get 2 profiles. Typically, it's going to be the college counselor who sends the school profile from the school which you're attending. So I don't know if they're going to be able to contextualize if you went for 9th grade at one school, if they have the same context as your last 3 years. So I would probably talk to your teacher, the school counselor, and for more clarity. What type of college might be interested best for a student going in the pre-med track? I would talk to a school counselor. I mean, there are so many schools who have a pre-professional pre-med program with organic and gen chem and bio and physics and all the prereqs. But I would talk to your guidance counselor at school, or if you want to talk to someone who specializes, we work with these ed consultants who may be able to guide you towards that. Is the AP International Diploma better than AP Scholar? You know what? I think they're both strong, but ultimately, I don't know about better. I would again defer to your school counselor for that one. They're both good. A score of a 1310 is now in the low range for college. Should I send it? Well, if you're the low end of the middle 50, if they want to see like a 1450 or 1310, I'd probably withhold it. But again, I want to see the range. Am I in the range? Am I the very, very low end of the range? Am I below the 50%? If I'm in the bottom quartile, I wouldn't send it. I would rely upon your grades and your rigor. All right, y'all. I think that is the end of our time. It's 9:20, where I'm coming from in Atlanta. Everyone, thanks so much for being here. We'll send you a copy of the slides. If you need any help this summer with testing, with grades, next year with executive functioning, let us know. It's what we do for a living. And everybody, have a great night.